It's activists. The unions have planted activists in every school across this country. Please don't come out against the good, loving teachers who are being bullied through all of this and silenced and brutalized by these unions who are supposedly their friends.
So regular viewers of this channel, regular readers of our magazine are very familiar at this point with some of the problems happening in our government school system. Today, we are joined by Rebecca Friedrichs. She had 28 years of experience in the classroom in a public school, and she is an amazing lady. She actually took on the union behemoths, the union Goliaths, and won. And she wrote this book here, Standing Up to Goliath. And so, Rebecca, thank you so much for being with us today. It's an honor to have you.
It is an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. So let's start with kind of your teaching career. Tell us, what was it like to be a teacher, and what was it that finally caused you to say, "Wait a minute, something's not right here"?
Well, being a teacher, I used to tell people I had the best job in the whole wide world. It was wonderful. I absolutely enjoyed being with those little kids every day, watching their little brains catch on, and they were just so excited. They loved learning. But the problem was the public sector unions, government unions that call themselves teachers, but they are not, have infiltrated my profession, and they have politicized my profession and the classroom. And they are unfortunately behind very frightening anti-discipline policies that have made it almost impossible for teachers to teach. They're behind radical sex ed curriculum. They're behind turning our children against our founders and against America. And so it really has reached a point of crisis. So I had to leave the classroom. I would still be there if it wasn't for the unions damaging my classroom.
Wow. So, Rebecca, tell us a little bit about your lawsuit. I know it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. This was a landmark decision. I mean, it was just absolutely huge. Walk us through the process. How did it start? What happened? I mean, were you encouraged as you were going through the fight? And then tell us about the outcome and the significance of that.
Sure. Well, it's so interesting. The way it happened, I can only attribute to God, because I had just this real urge in my heart to start exposing what was actually going on in the unions, because most people think they're great, and teachers were confused. They couldn't figure out why we had all these problems, who was behind it. So because of God urging me, I started writing editorials just to expose them. My goal was just to get one in the Orange County Register in my neighborhood. I didn't have any big giant dreams. And then all of a sudden, within 6 months of my first piece, I was lead plaintiff in a federal lawsuit heading to the United States Supreme Court. So our case was put together with 10 California teachers, and the Christian Educators Association International joined us as plaintiff number 11. And our goal was just to stop forced unionism, that all government employees should have the right to decide for themselves without fear or coercion whether or not to fund a union. So that's all we wanted to do, was give people freedom. We were all forced to pay these unions, tens of billions of dollars a year, as a condition of employment. We didn't think that was right or constitutional. So we argued based on First Amendment grounds, freedom of speech, freedom of association. Our case was heard by United States Supreme Court in January 2016. And was I encouraged? Yes and no. So the majority of teachers that spoke to me agreed with me 100%, but they were too afraid to tell me out in the light of day. So if they saw me in a dark closet, or, in the restroom, we were the only ones there, they'd tell me, "Thank you for what you're doing. I'm praying for you." Or they'd send me a private email, "I'm standing with you." But most of them would not stand with me out in the open. It was too frightening for them. So I had support, but it was very quiet support in some cases.
And so eventually you won, right? The Supreme Court agreed with you that it's not proper to force somebody to join a union they don't want to join. It's not proper to force somebody to fund political speech and political candidates that they don't want to fund. So tell us a little bit about the significance and the national implications of this victory. In my conversations with teachers across America, I did a speaking tour last year, and I traveled through, I think 44 states I went through, maybe 45, and I met maybe hundreds of teachers, and a lot of them didn't even realize that they didn't have to join the union. But because of your court case now, it is optional for them. So tell us a little bit about the significance of that and some of the consequences that have resulted so far from that ruling.
Sure. Well, it's highly significant, not only for America, but I think for the entire world, because the unions are really the root funding and organizing of a lot of the division and protests and all kinds of things that are going on in our country and worldwide. For example, the teachers' unions are 100% behind Black Lives Matter, and they have brought that into the classroom, Black Lives Matter Week of Action, and are actually training our children to be social justice warriors instead of teaching them to read and write. Education system is key for our country because our founders knew that the only way to keep a free republic was with a well-educated and moral citizenry. They had both of those things in our schools, and the unions have removed them. So this is just key for everyone, for freedom. I forgot the second half of your question. Can you repeat that for me?
So what are the national implications of this ruling now? I mean, I know teachers don't have to join the unions anymore. So kind of what happens from here now that the Supreme Court has agreed with you that it's improper and it's a violation of rights to force somebody to join this union?
Yeah, well, like I told people during our case, once we won, we were going to celebrate for 30 minutes and then keep on fighting because our case was really just the first domino. And by the way, just so your listeners aren't confused, our case was heard 1 month before Justice Scalia died. He died a month later and we lost his vote. So we ended up with a tie. And another case came behind us called Janus. So if you've heard about Janus rights, it's because Janus finished the job for us. And so all teachers and all public sector employees now have the right to stop funding unions. That's huge because, like I said before, they collect tens of billions annually, and they give most of that money to a very far left political agenda. They are not really using it to represent the employees. In fact, they're using it to undermine employees in many, many cases. So this is key that people now have the freedom. The reason most teachers don't know this is because the unions knew this was so key. This win was so important that the entire time we were bringing our case, they were pushing for what they called Friedrichs fixes. And they went around into all of the legislators that they control. If a state is run by a majority of Democrats, unfortunately, the unions control it. And so in those states, they were able to push a bunch of legislation and actually block people from learning the truth. They have gag orders on administrators and school boards where they're not allowed to tell people their rights. So that's the reason a lot of teachers and firefighters and DMV and cops don't know their rights. They all have the right to stop funding unions, and it's really key and very important.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. And so I know after your victory, you wrote this book here that I have in my hands, "Standing Up to Goliath," and your life has become, I mean, just incredibly fascinating. I understand you were in the Oval Office. You've been communicating with policymakers, and so tell us a little bit about the aftermath as far as your life has been concerned.
Well, I think it's interesting. I told you before that God was putting on my heart to write editorials just to expose what was going on in the unions and to defend real teachers and children and to defend our traditional educational system. And so I just thought I'd have a couple of editorials. Well, God had a different plan. He wanted to give me a platform. And so he did through that case. And so now I'm able to speak to high level officials. Like you said, I got to speak to President Trump and his cabinet, and it was wonderful. And they're listening and they care and they want to do what's right for kids and for families. And so another thing I did was I noticed while we were bringing the case, well, actually, I noticed this for decades, that teachers don't have a voice. The unions claim to be our voice, but they're not. They're not teachers and they're not really unions. They are hypocrites who are hiding behind teachers and unions, claiming to be of value when they're not. So one of the things I realized was that the testimonies of real teachers and parents and kids needed to be heard. So that's why I wrote that book, Standing Up to Goliath. The book is not really about my journey. The journey's in there. But the book is really full of about 50 different testimonies of very brave teachers that allow me to tell their story of what happened to them and how unions destroyed their career or damaged their students or damaged the curricula in their district or brought horrible policies that are making our schools dangerous and actually harming our kids and our culture. So that's what the book is about.
Oh, that's so amazing. And I know in recent weeks you've teamed up with some people who I consider just superheroes. Diane Douglas, the former superintendent of public instruction in the state of Arizona. People like Sam Sorbo, the nationally syndicated talk radio host and homeschool advocate. And so you're now on the board with them, the advisory board of Public School Exit. Tell us a little bit about the educational system now. I mean, what do you think parents ought to be doing? Say you're a parent with a few children, maybe they're, second grade, fourth grade, eighth grade. Should parents continue to send them to a public school in this environment, or should they be looking at other options? What do you think?
Well, I cannot urge parents and teachers strongly enough to get out of the public schools. In my opinion, the first day that we started having this lockdown with COVID, my heart breaks for people losing jobs and all of that. And that's awful. We need to get back to work. But I just said, thank you, God, for rescuing the children and the good teachers from the public schools because they really are not public and they really are not schools anymore. Maybe some of them are. I know in my classroom I was doing a great job, and a ton of teachers are trying to do a great job, but they are trapped in a corrupt and broken system, and it's been corrupted and broken on purpose. I mentioned before that the only way to keep a free republic is with a well-educated and moral citizenry. Unfortunately, our public schools are being used by very corrupt forces, very radical socialist forces who are literally using our schools to undermine the family. Parents, you need to know your parental rights are being undermined. They're being obliterated through the public schools and through the politicians that are being placed in office by, quote, teacher unions. They're not teacher unions. They're a political action committee for a very frightening political agenda. And they truly are. For example, in my state, California, if your child's 14, you no longer have the right to see your child's medical records. I mean, you don't have a right, and you're the parent. A child can be taken from school at any age for an abortion without your permission or your knowledge. And the teachers' unions are behind all of this and more. We'd have to be here for 10 hours for me to list off all the things the teachers' unions are behind. So they've undermined our schools. It's very important that parents and teachers realize that the best thing we can do for our kids is homeschool, private schools. These, in the old days in our country, we had independent schools that were just schools that were created by a community, like a co-op, homeschool co-ops, that kind of a thing, where you're working together. We do not need to believe the lies of the union that say that a parent can't teach their own child. Hogwash. They're saying that because they want more money from teachers who are paying dues.
Yeah, it's so true in my experience as well. I mean, unbelievable. I'm a teacher as well, and it's just incredible. So, I want to talk specifically about California and some of the stuff the unions are involved in. One thing that I came across not too long ago was these forums that were going up on local district websites and Department of Education websites in California, going right along with what you mentioned. They called it a gender transition support plan, and you could print out this form, and the student would fill out, what gender do you feel like? Do your parents agree with this? If not, we got to come up with a plan to hide it from your parents. I mean, it's just in your face. And then I saw the NEA formed a partnership with the Human Rights Campaign, an
Yep.
LGBT organization. And some of
Yep.
the videos, I mean, I saw what they sent to the teachers. They're encouraging teachers to ask the children, when you ask their name, ask them their pronouns. So maybe, Rebecca, if you would, give us some specific examples, what you've seen the unions doing in California, how they've kind of been able to corrupt the educational system. I mean, what are some specific examples that you've seen that really drew your attention?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question because the unions, and you mentioned the Human Rights Campaign. There's also GELSON, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU. There is a coalition of about 200 highly political organizations. Of course, they're all far left. There's no balance here. And this coalition has come together to use our schools to sexualize our children and to undermine parents. You asked specifically about the gender issues. So here's what I'm seeing on the ground. And I am seeing this in multiple states, including sweet places like Tennessee and Texas. So it's everywhere. And that's because the unions and their coalition are everywhere. So they start off with your preschooler, and they'll tell your preschooler, your parents, they don't call you mommy and daddy anymore. Your parents didn't know your gender when you were born, so they assigned you a gender. And there's really a spectrum of a never-ending number, infinite number of genders, and you'll figure out your gender someday. In other words, you can be a tree. I mean, literally, a tree is one of the genders. And this is troubling on many levels because I know some people who don't have an identity and their lives are a mess. And God says that we're made in his image, and he made us male and female. So this is a direct attack on every religion I know of. And so it's hard for my friends and I to understand what people are protesting about. They should be protesting about this absolute attack in our public schools on everything we believe. So with this whole gender identity thing, what they're pushing for now, and teachers, the unions are pushing for this as well, and funding and lobbying. They're pushing for children to be able to take pills that actually block their hormones, so block their puberty growth, so that they can transition and change from a boy to a girl or a girl to a boy. This is totally out of line, and this is happening in schools against the will of parents. And I know parents who have pushed back on this, and then the parents are harassed. I know of a young girl who didn't tell her parents what she was doing because her teachers, and I want to say it again, not good teachers, it's activists. The unions have planted activists in every school across this country. Please don't come out against the good, loving teachers who are being bullied through all of this and silenced and brutalized by these unions who are supposedly their friends. So anyway, this girl actually waited until graduation to come out. Her parents found out about it at graduation. And they're not allowed to be devastated because then the social services is going to step in. You're a child abuser. We need to realize social services is unionized too. Every problem we have in this nation, if you start to, connect the dots, it always comes back to those government unions.
Yeah. Oh, what you were just describing, Rebecca, it breaks my heart. The American College of Pediatricians has been very clear that convincing a child to believe that he or she can change their gender by, surgically mutilating their genitals and taking a bunch of hormones, that's just child abuse. That's just plain child abuse. And we need to just be honest about what's happening here. It's abusive. It's devastating to these poor children. And, the science on this is pretty clear. The overwhelming majority of these children, if they're just left alone, will actually come out of it on their own. And when I think
Yes.
about it, I mean, to me, that's like telling an anorexic girl, "Oh my goodness, you really are obese. Let's sign you up for liposuction." Right? It's so cruel. It's so grotesque. It just makes you want to cry. Rebecca, tell us a little bit, if you would, about the history of all this, because I mean, obviously, it didn't happen overnight. The NEA has been around for well over a century, not in its current iteration, but tell us a little bit about the history of how the union came to be controlled by these people whose values, whose beliefs are so at odds with the basic principles that our society was founded on, the basic principles found in the Bible. Was it a takeover? Was it always radical? How did we get to this point?
Yeah, it was absolutely a takeover. But before I answer that question, I want to go back just a minute to that science comment you just made. Your listeners need to know that the National Education Association rewrote the scientific method. This is in my book, as are several chapters on the sex ed issue. They rewrote the scientific method, and that's key because they crossed out empirical evidence. They crossed out this process of practice and proving that something is true, and they changed it to scientific consensus. And now they only accept the consensus of those who agree with their radical agenda. That's how they push this stuff as science. I agree with you, it's really child abuse. So we need to fight that. And we need to help get a voice for the many scientists out there who agree with true science, not this fake stuff, and they're being silenced too, just as great teachers are being silenced. So the history of what happened with the NEA. So the NEA started in the 1800s, and it was actually started by a very few teachers. And what's really interesting is when it first started, these teachers, this is in my book too, these teachers were creating these little booklets. They were called selections for memorization. They were full of Bible verses, prayers, stories of heroes and patriotism. And they were given to teachers in all teacher colleges. Teachers were required to memorize them, and they printed them so teachers could buy them for 1 penny a piece. Why? Because they were supposed to buy enough for their whole class and teach their children these Bible verses and prayers to do in class every single day. This was the goal when they very first started, because it's not true what they say about a separation of church and state. That's not in our Constitution, and early teachers knew that. Our schools were a key place for teaching morals, teaching children the golden rule: love your neighbor as you love yourself, that sort of stuff. So this is what NEA was up to. Well, there was an NEA leader that said NEA used to be a do-nothing conservative organization. Well, it was conservative because that's what was good for the children. And it wasn't do nothing, it was delivering morals and values to the children of America. And so the NEA was infiltrated. It was infiltrated by far leftists, and they infiltrated about, I believe, about the turn of the century, about late 1800s, 1900. I don't know the exact date, but that's when they started infiltrating. And the unions started, they removed prayer. They made sure that they got the right people elected and on the judge circuit courts and all of that, so that they could remove prayer. They removed the 10 Commandments. They removed morals. They removed the Bible from our schools. They removed everything that our schools were built upon, the classical education. They removed the classical literature. Common Core took the final swipe at that because we at least had some classical literature. Now they've removed it. And replaced it where these teachers can just come in and grab an article off of a porn magazine. I have seen this happen, and they could just teach that to the kids. So
Yeah.
they've literally undermined everything, and they've done it by politicizing, by undermining, infiltrating, and politicizing, and working in coalition with a whole bunch of other groups that have politicized this as well. We need to stop it.
Yeah, amen, Rebecca. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's such a fascinating history. I mean, they even made John Dewey the honorary life president. And this is a guy who went to the Soviet Union and just loved what was going on over there. I mean, when are we going to wake up as a society? So, Rebecca, I think
Yeah.
your book is going to be an incredibly important tool in awakening the American people to what's happening. Tell us, where is the best place for people to get your book? I know you have an organization for kids and country. What's the best website to keep track of what you're doing? Where can people learn more?
Great, thanks for asking. So they can find us at forkidsandcountry.org. And on that website, they can find all kinds of information: how to opt out of the union, frequently asked questions for teachers who are doing that, how they can get liability insurance to protect themselves because they believe they need that. They can find out about the sex ed. We lead them to amazing organizations that can give them more information on that. They can also find my book on our website. And they can find the book, Standing Up to Goliath, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and pretty much anywhere where books are sold online.
Do you have a preferred place where you want them to get it? Is it better to get it from your website or from Amazon? Do you have a preference?
Gosh, we don't sell it directly from the website. We lead them to Amazon.
Okay.
If they're gonna buy in bulk, because we do have something we call Adopt a Teacher, where it takes 3 minutes to read it. You can find it on our website, where we ask people, look, the only way we're gonna wake teachers up is to put our arm around them and love on them and teach them one-on-one, because they've been deceived and lied to for a very long time, and they're voiceless. And so we ask people to do that. We ask churches to do that. So if they want to order 20 or more books, I would direct them to bulk books. And bulk books will give them a really great rate on the book. They can save a lot of money that way.
Excellent. Well, Rebecca, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. You're a hero in my mind, and I think in the minds of many of our viewers. It's so important the work you're doing. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for speaking out for the children and for the teachers who are trapped in this system. We'll have to do it again sometime. God bless you. Viewers out there, go get a copy of this book. Visit her website. I mean, this education battle, this is what it's all going to hinge on, folks. If they manage to dumb down and indoctrinate the vast majority of our children in the public schools, all those other things we love about America, our freedom of speech, our Constitution, our religious liberty, it's all going to be gone, folks. And it all traces back to what Rebecca has been talking about. So thanks again for watching, guys. God bless. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm Alex Newman. This is The New American, and God bless you all.